I guess you could say Joe is no longer just an average Joe. This episode of Megalobox is downright one of the best episodes yet of the series, and it's gonna be very hard for this to be topped, but I do believe it will eventually be beat with the upcoming episodes, especially when we get into more stuff with Yuri. But to get right into it, this episode had a lot of emotions, and it really did a good job with the camera angle showcasing kind of Joe's perspective, his POV, and what he was going through throughout this episode. When I was first watching this, honestly, I thought that, the Shark Boy, I thought he did something to Joe. I thought he poisoned him or did something really dirty, because we heard in the last episode that this man was kind of heinous. He, picked fights, he, did fouls and stuff. He just was not a good person at all. So I assumed that he potentially did something to Joe, like maybe did something to where, like, he couldn't operate at his peak. But that was not necessarily the case. Joe experienced something that was very human. Something that, if you were in that situation, you would have experienced it as well. He experienced fear for probably the first real time since he's ever been doing megaloboxing. Because every opponent that he's ever fought in the underground, when he has lost, he's lost because he was forced to lose. And every person that he fought, he could just knock him out with like one hit and it was over. So he never really had a challenge. He never really had to put his life on the line and risk everything because nobody really gave him that much of a challenge. So this is his first real match, like official real match he's ever had, and you could see from the episode he has a lot of pressure on his shoulders. He has the crowd against him, he has, this dude wanting to come at him and all that because he has gear, and Joe does not have gear. I mean, there's just so many little things here and there that was riding on this. Obviously, Joe would experience fear and also succumb to the pressure, and he almost cracked under pressure, but he was able to hold up his own until he finally was snapped back into reality by Sacho and all that, which happened towards the end of the fight. The POV of this episode is probably the best part of the fight, or just the episode in general, because seeing Joe's perspective and seeing his foggy vision, you don't really know what to feel. Like, you don't know if it's because it was fear or, like I said, poison, and you're just like, whoa, did he get hit that hard? Like, did this man just, like, whop him real hard to where he got messed up that bad? But that was not the case. He was just sluggish because of fear. But at the same time, fear is a good thing. It allows us to know that we are alive. That is something that many don't typically realize, that fear, it seems like a bad thing, that you don't want to experience it, and it is a horrible experience, yes. But at the same time, it gets the blood pumping, gets the adrenaline pumping, the survival instincts going, and then you will go all in and sometimes even surpass your normal feats that you have, like your limit, your capabilities. So that's kind of what that was trying to show, that Joe was surpassing his limits. He was going all in, and he was trying to learn how to tackle with fear. And so his real opponent in this episode wasn't Shark Boy, but actually fear itself. And I feel like them skipping the two fights that, we didn't get to see was kind of more into a montage, it does make sense, and I will explain the reason why. I would have loved to have seen the individual fights. I would have loved that, to see, like, Joe go in and fight against people and all that, without gear. But in reality, there is some time constraints with Megalobox. It does not have, like, a 50-episode series, 20-episode series. I think there's only going to be 12 or so episodes, if I'm correct. And so, because of that, it's not going to have a whole lot of time. So, they need to have their time dedicated to important fighters, because obviously, when Joe goes up against an individual, we're going to probably have to learn about them as well. Their backstory, what drives them to be here. That's kind of what really drives, sports anime in general. Usually, let's say the MC is going to win the match, or this character is going to win because the MC needs to lose, but what really makes those matches is not who wins or loses, it's the feelings behind it and what drove him to be, drove these characters to be like that. So, obviously, they need to have episodes to be able to develop their fighters. For instance, the fight with Yuri and all that, and then this upcoming fighter and all that apparently has some history with, the coach that's working with, Joe. So because of that, obviously they needed to skip those 2 fights, and in reality, they weren't really important when you look at the context of what they were about. The first 3 fights were mainly just warm-up fights. They were mainly just Joe spreading his reputation, getting his name out there that he is Gearless Joe. He does not need gear to fight against anyone, and so obviously, those 2 other fights, it would have really just been the same thing as the first fight, except Joe would have had a little bit more of a grasp on holding back his fear and succumbing to pressure. So, those 2 fights being skipped, there's honestly no problem. From the narrative perspective, I think it's completely fine. And anyone that really is upset with that, they need to think about the grand scheme of things, that it isn't as important as the other fighters that we're probably going to see in the future, because we haven't even gotten into the official Megalo Boxing Tournament yet. So this is just the preliminaries and all that, just the beginning stage. So yeah, there's still a lot more fighters that we still have to see. Let's talk about Gearless Joe, okay? So, Joe does something absolutely insane, like completely crazy, and honestly, it's something that I had a hunch with in the last episode, but I still didn't think it was going to happen because of how crazy it is, and because of the theme of the series. Since this is Megalo Boxing, and, you know, it's supposed to have gear attachments and stuff, I assume they wouldn't get rid of something that's been, like, a big theme with the series, because that's kind of what separates this from a normal boxing series, is the fact that they have these attachments on their arms. So I figured they wouldn't get rid of that, and Joe would have something to be able to fight with. But that was not the case, which just, like I said, surprised me. And in reality, I think that was probably the best way to send a message for this series. Okay, so get right into that. Joe, he's being gearless, and this means that he does not have as much power behind his fist. He doesn't have the strength and power that you see from the other fighters. He cannot just probably one-hit KO people as easily because he doesn't have gear. And on top of that as well, he is actually faster. This is a good thing. See, many probably didn't realize this while watching the episode, but there was a scene when Shark Boy was chasing after Joe, and Joe was just dodging and all that. He has more agility. He's able to move around quicker because he's not, you know, bogged down by the insane weight of the gear. You gotta imagine wearing all that metal and stuff on you, it's gotta weigh a lot, obviously. I mean, thinking about it realistically, it has to weigh a pretty good amount of weight. So, Joe not having that on, it is dangerous, but at the same time, it gives him more agility. He's able to dodge blows and punches and get around and do little punches and slowly, you know, whittle down the endurance of the opponent he's going up against. So, he sacrificed power for speed. That's kind of what you can get from that, and that's what I saw in the fight. I don't know how many noticed that, but it was clear as day when you saw the man, you know, punching, it looked very powerful, like, you know, Shark Boy, but when Joe was punching, it seemed weaker, but he was faster. He was dodging everything. So that is the cool part about this. Now, speaking of dodging and all that, this is the flaw of Joe going gearless. See, because of his situation, it only takes one real punch, and it's all over. Like, if he takes one good sucker punch, he's probably not going to get back up. I mean, we even seen that demonstrated in this episode. When he took one good hit, he almost lost in the first round. So he's playing a dangerous game. He's on a tight rope right now, and if he gets hit really hard in one way, he's down for the count. So he's got to kind of like do this flawlessly. Like, kind of like when you're playing a game and you got to fight against the boss or something without getting hit. That's kind of what he's having to do. He's having to play it like Dark Souls, going in and all that, not getting hit or anything. It's kind of scary. Now, speaking of Gearless Joe, do I think he's going to continue this throughout the series? Like, is he going to go gearless to the very end of the show? I really don't know. I mean, it could go either way, because, I mean, like I said in my last review, I figured, you know, he was going to get gear or something, but obviously that's not the case. So, I mean, if they want to continue this, obviously they can. And many might say, but, you know, why doesn't he get the gear and all that? It would feel like a waste for them to set up everything with the gear and how it's so different, just to have the main character not have it. Well, that's the thing, though. Joe right now is the underdog. He is someone that is represented as someone that cannot beat the top fighters. He's someone that has everything against him. The world is against him. And it fits with the theme of the series. If Joe was to defeat opponent after opponent, without any gear, it's kind of like he's embarrassing, you know, the Megalo boxing in general. Like, he's completely disgracing the entirety of this, putting it down, showcasing that they don't need gear to be fighters. This no-name man coming out of nowhere and just stomping all the top fighters without any gear, it would show how talented he is, but just completely ruin the reputation of Megalo boxing. And that's kind of what Joe would stand for if he continued down the rankings with being gearless. So, yeah, that's the point I wanted to mention, that I do think that Joe might stay gearless for this entire series, and maybe he might be forced to put on gear against Yuri, but I do believe that, you know, he's probably going to remain gearless for a majority of this series. Now, next thing to really get into, I guess let's talk about the pressure with, you know, the coach and Sacho. So, Nambu, he actually had a lot of pressure and all that, so did Sacho, and they were getting really worked up because of what was going on with Joe, and it makes sense. I mean, you know, the coach, his life is on the line, so is Joe's as well. I mean, Sacho, he has probably a lot riding on it, we just don't have the whole concept or context of it, but I mean, obviously the coach has a right to be worried. I mean, he's in a really bad spot right now. If Joe lost, well, he's dead. So, I mean, I understand why he was breaking down and, you know, succumbing to pressure, and why he was freaking out and all that. And I really like how that played a big part with this episode, seeing how they were, you know, not being able to walk properly, they were slipping on the ground, to not being able to properly leave the ring, falling out and all that. It just showed an extreme case of nerves, people getting really, you know, scared and all that, not knowing what to do. That was just a great way to showcase character emotion. So, just props right there just for that alone. We get to see Yuri's master and all that, how she actually saw Joe, Gearless Joe, in the ranking, and then she was moving her hand forward, and then she stopped her hand, like she started clutching it or whatever. I'm just like, what was that supposed to mean? I mean, we know that she's kind of like the main host of all of this. Was she going to do something crusty and probably remove him from the rankings? Or was something else going to be done? I am very curious about that, because that definitely was an important scene with the episode, but there wasn't a whole lot of context because of the way it was done. Now, the last thing to talk about before I end this episode review of, you know, Megalobox, let's talk about the dude at the end. The one that, you know, wanted to meet the coach. You know, Nambu and all that, talked to him again, and is gonna be Joe's next opponent. So, this dude apparently is 17th in the ranking, and it's, this dude is crazy strong, apparently. And apparently, he also is connected with Nambu. And that means that this fight's gonna have a lot of emotional weight, because Nambu's gonna have to take down someone that he probably taught, that was a student of his for a very long time. And so this is going to be a weight to this to show that Joe is the superior fighter. Or, you know, this dude is going to want to prove that, you know, he's a better fighter than, you know, Nambu's current fighter. So there's going to be a lot of weight with this fight, and I'm looking forward to it, because, I mean, usually when you have something like this, the fights can get pretty meaningful. I've seen stuff like this in other series and all that, not boxing anime, but, you know, fighting anime in general. You see stuff like this when, you know, people have a connection, all that. It just adds a different layer to the fight. But I want to end this video here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And I love you guys. Chibi out.